Howdy everybody, and welcome back to World of Warships with Bugateer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Russian Tier 6 cruiser, the Budyonny, what is quite possibly the best cruiser at Tier 6, and maybe even Tier 7. The Budyonny joins a densely populated field of cruisers at Tier 6, and yet somehow manages to come out on top. So let's take a look at this ship, and as always, we'll start out with the history. Okay, just joking there. The Budyonny is actually one of the paper warships, specifically one of those warships that was never built. Now, I've tried to do what research I can, but I've turned up pretty much next to nothing. The only thing I can find are references to the Project 20 cruisers, which were intended to be follow-ons to the Kirov class. However, World War II happened, and the Russians figured that tanks and planes were far more important to them than ships. The only information I have for certain is that the design was for a 3 triple-gun turret ship armed with 6-inch rifles. Aside from that, I have nothing. Maybe with Wargaming being a Russian company, they have access to information that I don't, but as far as we can tell, there was never anything past a general concept phase. And even the name, the Budyonny, is, well, made up. So, let's go take a look at the ship in port and see what Wargaming has cooked up. Here's the Budyonny as you're going to see her once you have her in game and you have her fully researched. And she is a beautiful ship. Let's start off talking about maneuverability. And one of the aspects about the maneuverability of the ship is you can tell she has this long, fine Italian-inspired hull, much like the Kirov before her. The unfortunate consequence of this is that the ship has a pretty brutal rudder shift time and a turning circle radius. It is one of the most sluggish cruisers at Tier 6 to get into the turn at an 8.6 second rudder shift and a 710 meter turning circle radius. She handles like a bus. Concealment-wise, the Budyonny is pretty middle of the pack with a 12.7 kilometer surface detection radius and an 8.2 kilometer air detection radius with camouflage. When it comes to anti-aircraft fire, the Budyonny is fairly limited, relying on just 600mm guns, 12 37mm, and another 12 25mm. All this adds up to a rather meager DPS, but the benefit is most of your guns can reach out to a pretty decent range of over 3 kilometers. However, everybody else, aside from the Alba, beats you in terms of anti-aircraft firepower. While you do have the defensive fire consumable, don't expect to be shooting down a lot of aircraft. The Budyonny does come equipped with torpedoes, one quintuple launcher on either side of the ship. These are very Russian torpedoes though, with a short 4 kilometer range but a very high 65 knot speed and a high damage of 14,400. These torpedoes are pretty useless in most situations, but if you do find yourself getting in close with pretty much anybody, unless they are a full health battleship, these torpedoes alone will take them out. You don't want to be getting in close enough to use them, but if you got to, they will end a brawl immediately. Secondaries wise, you've got cruiser secondaries. 3 twin turrets with 100mm guns are all you have. They're short ranged but rapid fire, but if you actually can make use of them, just like the torpedoes, you done messed up. As far as survivability goes, the Budyonny has a strictly middle of the pack 30,800 HP. However, when you take a look at her armor, you'll find that she is actually surprisingly well armored for a Tier 6 cruiser. You have this nice wide 115mm armor belt along the side of the ship for the Citadel, and this armor belt is more than heavy enough to bounce large caliber shells so long as you angle well. I have bounced battleship shells off of this ship just thanks to careful angling. And even if you do get overmatched, the ship still has a pretty healthy 140mm athwartship bulkhead. And this isn't going to stop a battleship caliber shell, but if you put a little angle on it, you can potentially bounce off some cruiser caliber shells. Now, taking a look at the Citadel, it runs roughly half the length of the ship and does extend somewhat above the waterline, but it does have that nice wide armor belt protecting it. And the Citadel deck is 40mm thick. This is nothing impressive for maybe a battleship, but for a Tier 6 cruiser, this is pretty stout. However, it's a Tier 6 cruiser, so pretty much everywhere else it's going to be vulnerable to taking penetrating hits and taking lots of damage. The fore-end plating is only 13mm, as is the aft, which means you're going to be overmatched by just about anybody. Moving on, let's take a look at the Budyonny's main armament. You come armed with 9 152mm guns arranged in 3 triple turrets. Now, these guns are okay when you first take a look at the stats. They've got a decently snappy rotation speed, they've got an 8-second reload, and they do have a very long 16.6 kilometer range, but their dispersion is not fantastic out at the maximum range. Moving on, you take a look at the HE and the AP shells. Again, you have pretty standard damage and chance of fire for the ship at this tier. But when you move on, you see what actually makes the Budyonny special. And what makes the Budyonny special is that this is the first time you get proper Russian railguns. And what I mean by that is the initial velocity of your shells is 950 meters per second, and the shells weigh 55 kilograms each. So let's put some context on those numbers. And to do that, we're going to compare the Budyonny to the default Tier 6 cruiser, the Cleveland. Right off the bat, you can see that the Cleveland has a much lower initial shell velocity, and in the case of the high explosive, a lighter shell. And the Cleveland doesn't have quite the range that the Budyonny does, but we're going to do the testing at a range where that's not an issue. For the total numbers, it comes out for the high explosive shells that the Budyonny has 138 meters per second faster initial shell velocity and a 7.4 kilogram heavier shell. However, when you look at the armor piercing, the Budyonny has a much faster initial shell velocity, but the Cleveland has a heavier shell. So we're going to perform our test by shooting at an island about 13.7 kilometers away. On the left is the Cleveland, on the right is the Budyonny. Right off the bat, you can see that the Cleveland shells arc much higher into the air and take much longer to reach the target. Now we're going to switch over and we're going to fire AP. Now, keep in mind that the initial shell velocity difference is even greater, but the Cleveland shell is heavier. So that initial over 2-second difference in time of flight is down to 1.3 seconds. That difference in time of flight and that much flatter, more controllable arc is really what defines, in my mind, the Russian railguns. That high velocity, flat arc that makes it so very easy to hit your targets. In case it's not perfectly obvious, I really like my Budyonny. If I know the primary threat is going to wind up being enemy carriers and destroyers, and I need to support my battleships, I'd rather be in my Cleveland. But if the main threat I'm going to be facing is enemy battleships and cruisers, I'd rather be in my Budyonny every single time. And given how few carriers there are populating the matches recently, well, I'd rather be in my Budyonny 90% of the time. So naturally I get into a match with 2 enemy carriers, of course. Still, I can't complain too much because this is a Tier 6 match, which, when you're playing a Tier 6 cruiser, is kind of a gift, and the carriers are both Tier 5, and recently Wargaming saw in their great wisdom to basically ruin low-tier carriers by removing their manual drop options, so not too bad. So, we're on Trident, and I'm actually going to be pushing up here on the east side over near the sea cap. Now, my thought process is that this is a Tier 6 match, and therefore I don't have to play as cautiously. While the Budyonny does tolerate being up-tiered fairly well, when you do get up-tiered, you have to come in and play pretty passively, more of a campy behind the islands kind of playstyle. Now, I spot my first 2 enemy targets, a Kirov and a New Mexico, and since I'm about to slide behind the island, I take a few shots at the New Mexico, seeing if maybe I can't light them up. This enemy Nicholas is pushing up, and since there's only 2 enemy destroyers on the team, 2 enemy destroyers, I want to try to see if I can't knock this guy out pretty quick. I score some initial damage to him, but I don't get any critical hits. So I chop the throttle to let things develop, because again, I've been traveling in a fairly straight and steady line, and I don't want to become torpedo fodder. So I kick in the gas, and I get ready to engage this enemy Kirov that looks like he's going to be trying to push around to the side. Now, the reason to come over to sea, specifically this far to the east, is to try to cut the enemy off and to push them more into the center of the map. If I don't let them dominate this edge of the map, they're forced more into the more open areas to the side so that more of our team can get in on them. Now, I've made a bit of a U-turn to get guns back on this New Mexico, and here's those railguns. Target's 11.2 kilometers away, and I'm landing a lot of hits and a lot of salvos. Now, I do run inertia fused for high explosive on my guns because they really help out 6-inch gun cruisers. And I've also got Demolition Expert to help out with the fire chance, to keep the fire chance decent. I'm also running the flags that let me light fires. So I am definitely trying to set as many fires as I can on this guy as possible. Now that Kirov and also the Cleveland we saw earlier are starting to push around to the side. And oh, there we go, got a fire on them. And I landed 6 of the 9 shells. That's not bad. At that range, I would not be getting those kind of results with a Cleveland. So I turned to avoid his armor piercing, but it's not quite good enough. And Battleship armor piercing just doesn't care about 100 millimeters of armor. So still lighting this guy up, still trying to do as much fire damage as possible. But I see those enemy cruisers are pushing around, and my entire point for coming out to this side was to try to zone those guys out. So I've got to get turned around and start to put some fire on them. So the Cleveland is going after me with his armor piercing, but hey, what did I tell you? The armor piercing is not as easy to hit with. Or at least it's not as easy to hit with as the Budyonny's guns. So Nicholas is coming around, and I line up on him with my high explosive. He's the biggest threat with his torpedoes, and oh, got him. Unfortunately, that was a detonation, so ooh, I feel bad about that. Now the Kirov looks like he's had just about enough, and he's turning, and he's going to try to hightail it. And his shots with the armor piercing are not too great, and I set him on fire. Got 6 out of the 6 shots hit. So now I've switched over to armor piercing, and not too good. 2 over penetrations. Looks like they hit probably his funnel. So by now I've taken some pretty heavy damage from the return fire. Trying to line up and get a few last parting shots at this Kirov before he disappears. And yep, see, there we go. This time that armor belt actually did its job. So here the Cleveland is starting to come bow in on me, and yeah, not great. Except now, and I really don't have a good explanation. Yep, there are those torpedoes. This guy turns and gives me the flat broadside of his ship, and I just annihilate him with my first volley. And then here comes the second volley, and over penetrations that time, and our buddies get to actually finish him off. In fact, it was our New Mexico that finished him off. So now we're going to run up, and we're going to see if we can't start pushing that Kirov, but I'm thinking that there might be torpedoes on the way, so I pop my hydroacoustic just to make sure that I don't get jumped with torpedoes as I come around the side of this headland. Getting too close to the island, so I can't lob shots over it to hit the Kirov. That's actually kind of one of the problems with railguns, is that you can't lob shots over islands the way that you can with a Cleveland. At that close, I probably wouldn't be able to fire the Cleveland's guns over it, but I certainly can't with the Budyonny. So line the shots up and take the first crack at the Kirov. Now the Kirov is, well, exactly what I hoped was happening is happening to him. Forcing him out into the middle, closer to B, and not giving him any cover or anywhere to go. One last shot, empty the high explosive, switch over to the armor piercing. But, well, we'll see if I get a chance. There we go, one last volley. Got him. Citadel him. What a pity. I really do like the Kirov. Alright, so there's that New Mexico who is still taking fire damage, although not mine, and another New Mexico. So I take a quick survey, see if there's anything else going around, and oh, shells incoming, so I turn, and I am down to just a sliver of health. So we're going to make the complete turn. I've stopped shooting so that I'll fall off of that guy's view. But now that I've gotten mostly turned around and he is looking elsewhere, I'll start getting off shots with my guns. Initial volley goes right over the top of him. But here we go. Got all my gun turrets faced back around towards this guy. Get the lead right. And this is something that, again, compared to other cruisers, you've got an advantage with the high velocity shells. Make it much easier to get shots on target. And the heavy shells are a big important part because they don't lose as much velocity as they're traveling. So lighten this guy up. He's turning, he's giving us the flat broadside, but at this kind of range, I don't want to bother with armor piercing. I want to get some fires. So turning away, getting more shots out. I mean, you take a look at it. I'm doing 1,500 to 4,000 damage a volley with high explosive. So you really can't complain about that. Last volley that's probably going to get a chance to hit, and boom, got him. Didn't burn him to death. Did finally, the last few shots popped and took him out. So now, kind of off here by myself. So this actually kind of for once worked out exactly like I wanted it to. We fought over on this side, on the far eastern side away from C, and we drove them completely away. And now our team is able to sweep through C and be pushing into B, and the last of their ships are turning tail and running. Now, our destroyer smells cruisers. He smells carriers, because the popular hiding spot for all carriers on Trident is down there on the southern corner, hiding behind that kidney-shaped island. So he's running down there as fast as he can, trying to find him, wishing that our carriers would go spot him for him, but we know where they are. He doesn't need the aircraft to go find him, so he's fine off by himself. And I am trying to just close the distance to the rest of these guys as quickly as I can. Oh, here we go. There's that Cleveland. The other enemy Cleveland. And this is a range, well, I couldn't hit him at this range with my Cleveland, but at this range with the Kirov, maybe. So I've got armor piercing loaded just because of the distance. And oh, the first enemy carrier is spotted. He's broadside onto me, and I straddle him. The Budyonny's dispersion is about 150 meters at maximum range, so firing against a slender target like a cruiser is going to be a good chance you can get those straddles where shots go far and near and just don't hit the target. So now our destroyer has lit up both of the enemy Zwihos. Got one last good shot of that Cleveland. And so now the Zwihos are going to start trying to run. The Cleveland is packed back in there. And I start taking pot shots, seeing if I can't lob something over those. And whoa, not bad. Not great, doesn't do a ton of damage, but at least I do have the range pretty well. So this Zwiho has got his stuff together and is running fast. So I've switched over to high explosive because I don't want him getting off shots. This is low tier, so aircraft carriers have been, you know, ruined, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to give him any more chance to launch any aircraft. So we initially lost sight of him, but there we go. The Zwiho is back in view, and time to just start lighting him up. Now here the enemy torpedo bombers are returning from sniping our carrier, and they're flying overhead. Don't you wish you had defensive fire? Wouldn't that be nice to maybe just get a chance to knock down a bunch of those guys? But see, my guns are firing, and they didn't knock down anybody even after those guys flew completely over me. Now there's the Confederate pops up with all the damage I've done, and ooh, first Zwiho down, and there's the second one who has run himself aground. So we're going to switch back to the high explosive shells and torched them. Right, there are those enemy torpedo bombers. Looks like they're just going to start milling around. And I'm just going to pound away at this guy. And oh, double citadels with the high explosive. Initial fuse for high explosive is pretty nice. And again, 2 more citadels. And there you go. Kill secured. And there's a Kraken in the Budyonny. And for all the firing my ship has been doing, I have shot down exactly 2 aircraft, even with these guys flying completely over me. Oh, there we go. A third. If I was in my Cleveland, those torpedo bombers would have already ceased to exist. So, last few shots. And there we have the last enemy ship has popped up on radar, a Kaiser. No, not on radar, on the map. A Kaiser, and this is over. we control one cap. We're capping the second one, and somehow our guys failed to cap B. So now it's a matter of going after this Koenig, not a Kaiser, Koenig, sorry. So, but this Koenig has realized that this match is done, and he really does not want to get sunk. So he is going to try to run, but I'm in a Budyonny, which has a top speed of 35 knots, which is just about faster than in anything at tier 6 that is not a Duca d'Aosta or a destroyer. So I'm going to do my best to try to run this guy down. And, well, you know, hey, pad my damage a little bit. Why not? Got nothing else to do now that this game's wrapping up. So he turns away, but I'm in a Budyonny. So let's start seeing if I can't land some shells on him and maybe torch him up. And again, it's worth pointing out that the Budyonny's guns do have the longest range of any of the tier 6 cruisers, even longer than the Graf Spey's 11-inch guns, oddly enough. So you can start landing these hits, and oh, there is the high caliber. Beautiful, and the Bane of the Oceans. I actually had to go back and look that up to figure out what it was. It's the award for getting 100 heroic medals. So there you go, 100 heroic medals. Trying to torch this guy. Come on, he is not wanting to get set on fire. So last shot's out. Almost getting there. Come on. 989 tickets. Come on, hit him. Burn. Blow up already. Oh, down to 1630 health. Oh, and the tickets hit 1,000. There you go. Still, how much can you really complain? When you do 123,000 damage, you get Confederate, Kraken, and high caliber. Now, total number of hits during that game was 176 and set 9 fires, including 6 citadels, although, funny enough, 4 of those citadels were high explosive on the carriers. Yeah, for all the shooting that my anti-aircraft guns did, they knocked down a grand total of 4 planes. Good going, guys. Clearly wound up top of the team with over 2,000 XP. And as far as the results, I just chewed up both of those Zwihos and the Kirov, the New Mexico, the Nicholas. And the total of all the damage I did, 22,000 of it was from fires. I do think that first New Mexico was doing pretty well with keeping his fires under control and not letting me burn them for nearly as much as I would have. And at tier 6, with none of the money flags on the ship, I cleared 360,000 credits. That's not bad. So that's the Budyonny, a fantastic tier 6 cruiser whose only real weakness is that she leads to the tier 7 shores, a ship that manages to make the Pensacola look durable. So the Budyonny is definitely a ship that I would pick up, either for ranked play or for just messing around. She is a ton of fun. This has been Bogatir. I'll catch you next time.